Introducing our panel members. So Jeff Gale is going to help me monitor this session today. And this is the SARE panel. So go to the next slide. Well, I guess if you've been to the other sessions, we're running this pretty much the same as we've done the other sessions. It's a 50-minute session. So we'll be done here at 12:50 and then have another 10-minute break before the next session. There is going to be a CEU credit for CCAs, and we'll display the QR code at the bottom or at the end of this program. And then there's going to be a program evaluation. We ask you to fill that out once throughout the day. So if you end up on some other sessions, please fill it out when you're completely done with the whole Central Dakota Ag Day. So first, we'd like to start with introducing our panel speakers, which is Carl Hoppe. He's a livestock specialist from Carrington, and Clara Keane from Williston. And I'm going to stop my share here. And Carl, do you want to go first and introduce yourself and a little bit about your talk?
Certainly. Well, welcome today. We appreciate you being involved in the SARE panel discussion, part of Central Dakota Ag Day. My name is Carl Hoppe. I'm the Extension Livestock Beef Cattle Specialist here at the Carrington Research Extension Center. And I'm also the SARE co-coordinator along with Claire Keane, who's going to be speaking a little bit, as well as Bill Hodes, who's the county extension agent up in Devils Lake, North Dakota for Ramsey County. And let me just say, SARE is a unique program that's sponsored by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. SARE stands for Sustainable Ag Research and Education. Just Google the word SARE and you'll find a plethora of information under that particular item. One thing I'd like to highlight this morning is the SARE program. There's a bunch of information, but one of the other sides that the SARE program has is grants. Now, these aren't grants like to build bigger dikes or add things like the NRCS does. This is investigation grants and education grants. And SARE has a list of 6 of them available in the North Central region. I'll just quickly go through those. And they are the Farmer Rancher Grant, which is $9,000 for one person for 2 years to investigate an idea on their ranch that or farm that could contribute to more sustainability. There's a Youth Educator Grant for people that are involved in youth education, and that's at $4,000 for 1 year. We've actually got the Partnership Grant, where there's a whether it be a county agent or a crop consultant that would head up the grant and have like 3 or 4 different producers involved in with them, that could be good for $40,000 for 2 years. There's also the big research and education grant that most researchers look at, and it's a $250,000 grant that lasts for 3 years. We have professional development grants. It's a $90,000 grant lasting for 3 years, and then there's actually a grant for graduate students at $15,000 that lasts for 3 years. I share those numbers just so you have an idea that this is a pretty big program that's shared across the North Central and even the national region. And while all the applications for these grants are closed for 2020, they will be coming available in 2021. You'll have to go to the website, northcentral/SARE. northcentral.sare.org/grants, and they'll be available come April or October or November, December. So with that, I'd just like to introduce the topic of SARE and all the different information and grants available through the program.
All right, thanks, Carl. And then Claire is the other panelist that we have, and then I'm going to have Jeff introduce himself after Claire.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Claire Keane, and I'm an extension specialist in cropping systems out at the Williston Research Extension Center. As Carl mentioned, I'm also one of the state North Dakota SARE state coordinators. And my talk today, though, was about Kernza, a new perennial grain crop that's under development. And I'd be happy to talk about Kernza, answer specific questions if people have any. I guess, Alicia, would you like me to kind of give a synopsis of the talk in case?
Yeah, you just give us like a minute or two overview of what Kernza is.
Yeah, be happy to. So Kernza is, it's actually intermediate wheatgrass, but intermediate wheatgrass that has been intensively bred or selected for increased seed size and yield for about 15 years now by a breeding program at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. And then about 10 years ago, the spring wheat breeder at the University of Minnesota, Jim Anderson, also started working with it. And so the first named Kernza variety that's been released is Minnesota Clearwater, that was released by the University of Minnesota in 2019. Lee DeHaan, the breeder in Kansas, does have some lines. He likes to joke, he's very much a breeder. He doesn't get into the naming of things. So his are just cycle 5, cycle 6, cycle 7. And cycle 5 or C5 is the most current seed that's available, put it that way, from the Kansas program. And we have some of that growing here in Williston, both as a part of a small plot variety trial work that I've been doing, and then also as a small seed increase, because I'm very excited about it and hoping to help overcome the barrier of limited seed supply, because that's one of the big issues with Kernza right now, is that there's a lot of interest in it, but very limited seed. In terms of consumer excitement, there's a few products out there you may have heard of. Patagonia Provisions has a beer. It's currently available on the West Coast and in the Denver market, but they would like to take it national. But one of their main limitations is just the availability of Kernza. It's called Long Root Ale. And then you can find Kernza on the menus of some specialty restaurants across the country that might do their own in-house milling to make, small scale artisan bread or other wheat-based products. So there's not a lot of Kernza out there, but there's a lot of excitement. And from the Land Institute's perspective, and also the University of Minnesota, the idea of a crop that you can plant, once and get 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 years of grain off of could have some really good environmental benefits. The state of Minnesota has actually invested quite a bit in the Kernza development program because they're interested in what they're calling wellhead protection. So in some of the sandy soil areas of central Minnesota that are, very high production potential for corn and soybean and even sugar beet, growers are hesitant to put perennials on them, but yet there's an issue with nitrates getting into the groundwater and causing issues for drinking water supplies. So Kernza, the state of Minnesota is hoping that maybe Kernza could be a fit in some of those areas where you have a crop that you don't need as much or any fertilization. The farmer can still have a grain crop available to sell, but then you're also a deep-rooted perennial, keeping those soils in place, keeping nitrates out of the drinking water as a win-win solution there.
All right, well, thank you, Claire. And Jeff, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Jeff Gale. I'm the NDSU agent for agriculture and natural resources in Foster County.
All right, like I think I said, if you want to put some questions in the chat box, feel free. But we are also a smaller group here, so if you want to open up your mic and ask some questions, please feel free to do that as well too. But if we don't have any questions to start with, I guess I have one for Claire, because I've been really kind of interested with Kernza. Can you mix it with alfalfa, or is that something people are trying as far as making it more of a forage?
Yes. So people are trying that. The University of Wisconsin-Madison, there's a researcher there named Valentine Picasso, whose main focus with Kernza has been in forage mixes. So growing Kernza with alfalfa, and then also I think medium red clover, and looking at the forage production of those mixes. So yes, it's as I mentioned, it is intermediate wheatgrass. So having a grass legume mix, certainly in Wisconsin, a dairy situation is where most of that forage is going. But in terms of increasing the protein of the feed by mixing it with a legume is definitely something that can be done. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Carl, I guess Carl's asking a question. Does Kernza decrease in yield as the stand gets older? That's a good one.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Yes, good question. And the answer to that is yes. So currently, most of the work on Kernza grain yield has been done in Kansas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, a little bit in New York. And they've seen a stair step down in yield as that stand gets older. So having the highest yield in year 1, a bit lower in year 2, and then depending on the environment, it can really fall off in year 3, or it might still be worth harvesting for grain in year 3. In the semi-arid environments, so in Kansas, and then there's one grower in Montana who's had it for a few years. They've actually had, the person in Montana, his first year didn't go well. It got very weedy, and so I believe he ended up just haying the field. But he had decent yields his second and third year, and so it doesn't seem to be stair stepping down quite as much in drier environments. Here in Williston, I only have 2 years of data, unfortunately, with my variety trial so far. But at least on the second year of the couple of plots I have here, I did see slightly higher yields my second year compared to the first. Kind of I'd say the rule of thumb when a farmer asks, it's like expect 2 or 3 years, you might get lucky and get a 4th, maybe a 5th, but expecting the yields to step down over time is where it is. The state of the crop.
And Carl's got another question. Does it respond to increased soil fertility?
Good question. In terms of replicated, small plot trials with different rates of nitrogen, I don't know off the top of my head, but yes, I think in Minnesota, the agronomist there working with it, Jake Jungers, if any of you may know him, I think he's recommending about 50 pounds of N per acre for folks growing Kernza, in a conventional situation where you can apply urea, but certainly the organic farmers growing it, applying either poultry litter or cow manure beforehand. Yes, it does respond to fertility. I don't know that anybody's yet done, say, a fine enough rate response to map it out. But yeah, extra nitrogen does help with the grain yield.
Good. And Mike Osley's got a question. Will Kernza require any on-farm processing to market the grain?
Yeah, good question. So Kernza is a hulled grain. Currently, the Kernza varieties that are out there, when you harvest it, it's not free threshing, so that hull's still attached to the grain. So then the question is, is your buyer willing and able to accept a hulled grain? The real small scale operations that are using Kernza, so there's some breweries in Minnesota and Wisconsin. If you're familiar with Bang Brewery, in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, I know they brew with Kernza. I've heard that most brewers can keep the hull on, so they're accepting grain with the hull on, so it's saved that dehulling step. For end users who want a hulled grain, that needs to be dealt with. I'll just put it that way. And so whether that's happening on farm, or there's an end user, if I can remember the name, a Perennial Pantry. I think they're outside of Minneapolis. They're a small group that is buying hulled Kernza, and they're dehulling it themselves and then also milling it into flour. And so they are buying hulled grain from farmers. I think, Mike, to answer your question, I guess I don't know of any farmers dehulling it themselves. I think maybe Klaus Martin up in New York might be doing that himself, but he also does a variety of specialty grains like spelt and things like that. So he had that capacity. But I think most of the small scale supply chains that are starting to develop, the folks using the Kernza are taking on the dehulling step.
So if a producer was interested in North Dakota, was interested in maybe doing seed increase, are we ready for seed increase yet? And if a producer wanted to take part in that, how would they go about the application process?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Jeff. If I can navigate Zoom and talk at the same time, I could put in the chat box kernza.org. So that's a website that's been created by the Land Institute to help conglomerate and make accessible all things Kernza. And there is an application under kernza.org. I think it's the section called For Growers. and you can apply to indicate your interest in growing Kernza. Jeff, to your question about seed increase, it's an interesting place right now. So both the Land Institute and University of Minnesota are eager to increase seed and then therefore have more seed available to plant more acres. But at least with the Land Institute, who I've been working with, because the breeder is actively developing new varieties, so the seed increase I have is C5. I believe Lee is working on C7, and he's wanting to get C7 out because it's showing increased yield. So they're kind of walking this fine line of wanting to increase C5 seed a little bit, but they don't want it to blow up because C7 is already better, and so then they want, you know, to position C7 to go out onto more acres eventually. So short answer to your question, yes, there's interest in contracting with farmers to do seed increase, but right now, like if you fill out the form on the Kernza.org website to indicate your interest in being a Kernza grower, the assumption is it would be for grain that'll be, you know, destined for a food use market rather than seed. I'm not sure if the Land Institute is actively seeking growers to sign up for seed increase, but if it's something you're interested in, I think you could indicate that. There's a comment section. You know, say if you have grown certified seed in the past, that would be a big thumbs up. You know, indicate that if you have experience growing crop for seed previously, state that, and state you'd also be interested in perhaps being a seed increase grower for them, and they might reach out to you and take you up on that.
And I was able to put the Kernza website in the chat box if people want to go there. I have a question with how do you combine Kernza? Because in my mind, I'm thinking of perennial crop. So perennial grass, is it green throughout the whole fall, or how do you, and if so, are you combining it green?
Yeah, great question. It's still somewhat green, yes, when you combine it. I'm curious if I can pull up a photo I have of me combining it last year. And I apologize, having like 3 screens gets a little bit convoluted. Do you see it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So that's me combining the Kernza in 2019. And yeah, so the Kernza plants were still pretty green. They were more dry this year. Severe drought, I'm sure, pushed that. But yeah, it was difficult. It was very difficult my first year to know when to harvest because even the experienced Kernza growers told me, so this plant, the seed head, will get a nice golden brown. The glooms or bracts on the individual florets do get a dry color. It doesn't turn a nice bright gold like wheat, but they definitely turn a straw yellow. But the stem stays green, and some of the leaves at the bottom will dry down, but others don't. So it looks way greener, definitely, than a wheat crop would at ready for harvest. And something currently that's also just a challenge with Kernza is that harvest timing. Lee, the breeder in Kansas, advised me, you know, as soon as those seed heads look consistently dry enough, you should probably go cut it, because one of the issues they're also working with Kernza on is reducing shatter. That some of the varieties are a bit more prone to shattering, and so if you can harvest on the earlier end of maturity, you're just retaining more seeds on the head to get into the combine. For how did I do it? I'd say I learned my first year, I cut it way too low. I cut it down at 6 inches, and these are 40 to 45 inch tall plants. So they're fairly tall. A lot of straw went through our poor little combine. This year I put it up quite a bit more at maybe 18 inches or so. Maybe it was even at 20 inches taller than that. And that was good. Just having less straw move through the combine, I think, was helpful. And I could imagine too, I mean, certainly bigger equipment, doesn't struggle as much, but at the same time, it will be somewhat green when it goes through. And so I think that the answer is cutting it higher. And then also what we did for residue management this year. So I cut it high, and then our farm manager came back with our big combine about a week after, and then cut it short, and then just chopped and spread the residue over the field to get it out of there. You know, so.
Yeah, and then Chris has kind of a question too about combining. How does the combine height impact plant survivability?
Good question. I don't know. Yeah, I'd say I don't, last year cutting it low, I don't think I killed any of it, but we also had really good fall moisture last year. I guess it'll be interesting to see this year. Williston was super dry. We had our third driest growing season on record for the county. And the Kernza stand was still very brown in the fall. I don't know that it'll die, but it certainly didn't come back much after it was harvested.
And in your talk, you talked about that Kernza might be good for salty areas. And does it have really high salt tolerance, or is it more just because it's the perennial deep-rooted grass?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So intermediate wheatgrass is not a super salt tolerant grass species. So the green wheatgrass and slender wheatgrass and the hybrid wheatgrass that's sold as AC Saltlander, those are a very high salt tolerant species. Intermediate wheatgrass, I wouldn't put them in that category. It's probably barley, maybe a bit better than barley, but it's not going to be a highly salt tolerant perennial. So when I talked about it as a potential option for helping manage saline affected soils, I think about it as a plant option, to certainly in the recharge area, and then maybe it also can survive a bit farther into a seep, I'll put it that way, than some other species might be able to, like maybe a salt tolerant alfalfa, or certainly a non-salt tolerant alfalfa could do a little bit better than that. But if you have a saline seep with an EC of 20, no, Kernza won't grow in the worst of that.
Okay, and then kind of going off that, does it bunch, or is it like a bunch grass, or not so much?
It's more bunchy than I expected, and I think, at least so far, I think that's just because of how dry we are out here. So the intermediate wheatgrass has very short rhizomes. I guess the way I'd put it is that the pictures, and then also I've been to Wisconsin to see some of their Kernza small plot work. After 2 years in Wisconsin, it's hard to find the rows. You can still find the rows. And then after 3 years, it's not totally sod bound, but it's pretty close. Whereas here in Williston, my now 2-year-old stand, it looks more like a bunch grass than a sod. I can still see the rows and kind of individual crowns. And so I guess I'm not an expert on intermediate wheatgrass biology, but to me it says that it spreads a lot better in wetter environments than it does in, at least Western North Dakota.
So Claire, what questions are you trying to answer in your research?
Yeah, thanks. So the first project I started with Kernza was a variety trial. So I have 9 varieties planted here that were seeded both at a fall timing and then at a spring timing. And the questions I'm interested in on the variety trial side is to help the breeders in Kansas and Minnesota just figure out which genotypes seem to do better in different environments. And only 2 years of data so far, but we've seen that the Kansas lines seem to be doing better here in Western North Dakota than the Minnesota lines, which, on the one hand, I don't think is too surprising, given that Salina, Kansas is, it's a lot warmer, certainly, than we are, but they're a lot drier than Minnesota. And so I think Lee's material, the Kansas material, might be more suited to us, given that it's being bred in a semi-arid environment. And the other interesting thing with the varieties, so one of the Minnesota varieties, Minnesota Clearwater, and then another of their experimental lines have typically been out yielding the Kansas lines in Minnesota and Wisconsin. But for me, I haven't seen that. For me, it's the Kansas lines doing better. So it's helping the breeders kind of figure out, which material is more likely to succeed in different different regions. I did try a nitrogen rate study. So per Carl's question earlier, I put out different rates of urea, 0, 25, 50, and 75 pounds. Unfortunately, it was broadcast. It wasn't treated with agrotane or anything. And it went out the 1st of May, and we didn't get rain until the last week of June, more than 6 weeks later. So I think I probably lost a lot of that nitrogen to volatilization. And then we were just so darn dry here. I didn't see a nitrogen response. Yeah, so I'd like to do that again next year to see again if I anticipate there's probably some tweaking to do with nitrogen recommendations in a dry environment. So interested in that. And then I'm also part of a group looking at broadleaf herbicide options in Kernza. So we were trying 2,4-D, clopyralid or stinger, and MCPA. Because certainly weed control during establishment is an issue, and having some herbicide tools has been a need that certainly conventional growers have expressed if they're going to plant a perennial grass crop.
Do you know or have experience, because I think you talked about that you can actually plant it in the spring and the fall in your talk. So is there a better time to plant that, or is that going to be something maybe future research or figuring when to establish it in North Dakota?
Yeah, I think we need more research on it. The benefit to planting in the fall is that you get grain, within 12 months on the calendar. Kernza does need to vernalize like winter wheat. So, when you plant it in August, hopefully you'll be able to harvest grain the following July or August. Whereas if you plant it in May, it'll be until, a year plus later that you'll have grain. So from the perspective of someone, needing to turn a profit and have a grain crop to harvest, I'd say fall, will probably make the most sense. However, at least, in Western North Dakota, I'd say we don't get wet falls very often. So it could be a higher risk than a spring planting. And an interesting just observation, I didn't do any measurements on it, but my fall planted stand that I planted September of 2018 was really quite clean. The Kernza didn't get very big in the fall, but there was enough growth there, I think, in the fall, and then it came on well enough in the spring to do a pretty good job of suppressing weeds. Whereas the spring planted spring of 2019, we had decent moisture growing season 2019, so it got established okay. But green foxtail, barnyard grass, Russian thistle that was there also did pretty well too. And so now a year later, my fall plots still look pretty clean. Weeds are starting to come in the alleys and all, but the plots are still pretty good. Whereas that spring trial, the Kernza's, I'd say, starting to smother out those annual weeds, but they're still there. So I at least saw a weed control benefit to the fall planting out here.
Do you think there's going to be any grass weed control herbicide options, or is that going to be if you have grass weeds, good luck?
Yeah, good question. I don't have a list of which products, but I know a collaborator at Cornell is starting to do some greenhouse work with herbicide screening, and I think he's focusing on some of the group 2 products. I don't know if it's Accent, diphensulfuron, some of the other group 2s labeled in wheat, to see if we can get grass control options that are safe on the Kernza. So I'd say yes, that's on the radar of a need, but we don't have an IR4 label application started for any grass products.
And then Carl's got another question. I was hoping it didn't need extra nitrogen. Can a legume interseeded with it provide its nitrogen needs, or will that reduce the grain yield due to the legume?
It's a great question, Carl. I know the group at the Land Institute is looking at the interseeding Kernza and alfalfa and trying to track if the Kernza is getting nitrogen from the alfalfa and if that's resulting in enough to have grain yield comparable to an otherwise fertilized Kernza monoculture. I don't know the status of that work, but I'd say there's folks interested in it. I think the Land Institute in Kansas, and then some of the folks at Wisconsin are starting to ask that question.
Are you aware of any other perennial crops that are getting ready to be at this stage where people start experimenting with them a little more, kind of at the stage where Kernza was a couple of years ago?
Yes, a success story out of the Land Institute that hasn't gotten a lot of press in the US, which I think is kind of unfortunate, but we don't grow a lot of rice here. Breeder from the Land Institute has partnered with scientists in China for a number of years to work on perennial rice. And I don't know the acres off the top of my head, but there are some acres of perennial rice in production in China, and a lot of excitement around that, again, to deal with erosion issues primarily. But here in the US, Kernza is at the forefront, I'd say, of perennial grain crops. There's a very small group looking at perennial flax. I don't remember names. It's a USDA researcher. I can't remember if he's in Fargo or not. But starting to look at some perennial flax lines. But I don't really know much more about it than that. And I think that's still very, very experimental, not even going out at the farm stage yet.
So Carl, I want to ask you some questions about SARE. Can you give us some examples of projects that have had SARE funding to give kind of an idea of what some of those projects look like?
Well, maybe the person that should respond to that would be like Dr. Mike Osley, who's currently on a SARE research-funded project. We could go to Doug Lambloom and listen to him talk about grazing cattle and creating a sustainable cover crop, fall forage, cattle growing opportunity out there. If we go to our website, we can look through past reports of previous projects, and there's ones just in North Dakota. You caught me without doing that, and I can't report all their different names, but there's more names than what I can report on the people that have gotten SARE projects to explore an idea. I think one of the unique ones that I ran into over the years has been raising fruit under high tunnels. Fruit trees in North Dakota under high tunnels. And so that was kind of intriguing. And then, of course, there's some vegetables that were grown over with tarps over the or nets over the top to reduce insect control in organic farms. The use of AI in beef cattle was done by Carl Dolan to see if that could create a more sustainable beef cattle opportunity in his research. And using genetics of known background bred into cow herds, they looked at increased weaning weights. They looked at whole farm financial management dollars, and those are projects that were funded by SARE. And the list keeps going on and on. The number of people have done it. SARE's been around for 30 years. So the amount of projects that have been done is quite a bit. And actually the projects are really competitive these days. So if you're looking at getting one, you need to look at what type of projects were done in the past. So again, I encourage you to go to the northcentral.sare.org and then look for previous grants or previous reports. Actually, it's called project reports, and it's right next to the grants tab. And at that point, you can look through a whole, you can search the database even, and the database can be across the whole United States rather than just in North Dakota. I believe we had a youth educator grant one time that dealt with sheep, and another one was dealing with just sheep production itself, and Rick Schmidt was involved in those particular projects, as well as growing squashes and those types of things down on the Standing Rock Reservation with Sue Isabel and youth. So it's just amazing the number of different projects that are available.
In regard to the farmer rancher grants,
yeah,
is that a 2-page application or a 10-page application? And what are they responsible for if they get a grant? What do they have to do in terms of reporting or education?
Yeah, it's let me just say the grant process, don't be taking it lightly because there's lots of competition for these grants. So while it might be just a 2 or 3 page grant application, it does need to be well written. And I think Claire and I and Bill would be willing to review those for you when you write those up, just to see if you have enough things included in your proposal to make it competitive and funded. What type of things do you need to have done? Well, the biggest things, you got to test an idea and compare it to something. So while the research doesn't have to have as much rigor as what we might like to have in some of our scientific journals, we certainly like to have some comparisons so we can share with others. This is what I found compared to what I didn't do, or some other project that has been going on. Along with that, we need to provide some education to others, whether it be people in your community, whether it be farmers outside the state sharing the information that you came up, or whether it be publics or the general public, or everybody. There needs to be a sharing of the information, more than just a write-up that's stuck on a web page someplace. It needs to be an opportunity for people to come together, and actually on-farm reviews of what's going on is highly encouraged. Well, at least it was before the virtual world showed up.
Yeah, and I guess, Carl, do you mind if I add a little bit to that?
Please do.
Sure. Jeff, really good questions. So it's certainly not a really long grant application, and the SARE organization knows that most farmers aren't professional grant writers, and that's just fine. But there's certainly the sections of you need your objectives, what are your goals, a description of the project, what are you going to measure. As Carl said, just faltered here. You do have to put together a budget and an outreach plan. Yeah, thanks. And that outreach plan is a really key part of the application, because SARE wants to see not only farmers who have good ideas, get funded to try their ideas, but the unique thing about SARE is really promoting, farmer to farmer education, farmer outreach, and making information learned accessible to a broader audience. And that's an opportunity where I'd say if a farmer, is interested in a farmer rancher grant, please reach out to me, Carl, Bill, but also maybe your local county extension agent, because SARE is also really happy to see farmers partner with, say, their extension agent to share their work. One of your outcomes, you don't have to put on a 2-day workshop to share what you learned. You can say, well, I'd like to do a field walk to look at these treatments, and my county agent said they would help me advertise it and maybe bring in this other person to speak. That would be fantastic. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. If it's maybe a soil health topic, partnering with your NRCS or Soil Conservation District board or someone there would be great. I'd say there's certainly ways to be strategic about it, and make that outreach component not only manageable, but also find partners who can help you do it.
And I would like to volunteer with that yes, they do need a report at the end to explain what was done with your project. Of course, the funding is somewhat dependent upon what you report. And I think you get some of it up front and maybe some at the very end to go along with the budget that you created. Now, with the Farmer and Rancher Grant, it can be a single person putting in for an application, or it can be 2 people, 2 different entities, or even 3 different entities. And then, of course, the 9,000 turns into 18, which turns into 27 as the upper end for the grant request. But at least there's more people and more ideas that can come together to do that. On the website, there's actually a section here that's titled, on our SARE website, that's titled Applying for a Grant. And within that, it says Writing a Grant Proposal. And it goes through all the different steps that we just chatted about.
And for the Farmer Rancher Grant and the education grant, who reviews those? Are they reviewed by North Dakotans, or are they reviewed by someone in the region but outside of the state?
That's actually a really good question. So the North Central region would have representatives from across the whole North Central region to look at these grant applications. These are not just North Dakota grant applications for North Dakota funds. They're funds for the North Central region, so they would have representatives. It might be professionals like a county extension agent. It might be a researcher on campus. It might be a banker. It might be the person that works in the state ag department. It might be a consultant out in the industry that's been working in some particular area. You have to be nominated or requested to be serve on these, but then they try to have turnover too. So there's a different view of ideas every year. So if you're on a committee, like I've been on the Research and Education Grant Committee for several years, now I'm off. So they cycle people in and out. I believe Claire's on one of the grant review committees right now. So it all depends. They'll have state coordinators like us, but there's a wide range of people. And it's not just a handful of people. I'd say 15 to 25 people review these grants. And of course, they're ranked accordingly and discussed. And I like to say sometimes timing is everything. You know, if you got a real hot topic this year, but you're not talking about it, somebody else might get funded on that hot topic. But next year, yours might be the hot topic, and then you would be funded. So just because you got turned down one year, don't give up. Refine it and put it back in the next year.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I don't know what the percentage is, but I think for the Farmer Rancher Grant Review Panel, they do make a very strong effort to have a good chunk of those reviewers be other farmers. But I guess kind of going back to writing the grant application, you know, maybe you're wanting to do something with wheat, but the farmer reviewing your application is a dairy farmer in Wisconsin. You know, so there's certainly that farmer to farmer understanding, but you always have to be able to communicate what it is you want to do and why, knowing that a lot of the folks who are going to read your application may not know, you know, much about your system. If your system is honeybees or vegetables or soybeans, you know, they do try to have farmers review it, but it might not be a farmer who's doing the same kind of cropping system you are.
I will have to point out that our SARE website, again, has reports from previous grants for the past 30 years. So sometimes you might think it's a really good idea that needs to be funded. Be sure to look through the past grants that have been funded and see what the results are. You might be surprised that that project's already been done for that idea. So then rather than repeating the same project, you'd have to make a different twist or change to it to make it more fundable for this time. But please look at the history of what's been going on. After 30 years of funding projects, there's quite a few projects that have been done, even in honeybees.
And I did share the North Central SARE website in the chat box. So if anybody wants to click on that, they can go to the website too. And do either one of you want to touch on what kind of resources SARE has as far as information that's available?
SARE has a lot of free information available. All of our information is available on our websites, on the SARE website, whether it be the national, North Central, Northeastern, Southern, or Western SAREs. There is printed material, and there's a mailing list if you want to be put on an email mailing list for the material. The printed material can be all the way from books to field notes to other publications. If you actually go on a website and see what's available in print, there's a whole listing of information. Everything's available on a USB drive, or it's downloadable too. If there's a specific publication that you need, contact one of us and see if we can, Claire, Bill, or I, and see if we can provide it for you. If you go to the website, again, it's available in print. One of the popular ones recently has been Farmer's Guides to Business Structures, which deals with different types of, whether it be a C Corp, an LLC, or a subchapter S, or whatever type of corporation. Those things are discussed in that. And of course, there's even a book on how to conduct research on your farm or ranch. There's investing in the next generation of ag scientists. There's cover crops for pollinators and beneficial insects. It's amazing how that one's available. All those information is available online. You just take the time at that website to seek through see what's available. And if you need hard copies, please contact us and we can try to get it to you. Or you can order them online from the SARE site.
Yeah, I was just, because I'm in my office, you know, a lot of folks are familiar with managing cover crops profitably. This was a book, the first edition was put out probably over 10 years ago now, but it's been updated and revised. And this is one of the best resources that I'm aware of, with a lot of nice tables about cover crop selection. You know, what kinds of things are you going for? What are some of the pros and the cons of the different species? So this one's been very popular for a long time. And then one I reference a lot. They have good workbooks, like Carl was saying, things on farm business management, planning, and financials. They came out with an organic transition planner a few years ago that kind of starts, at the basics, working through questions about, why are you interested in transitioning to organic? What are your goals? And then, checklists of things to know and be ready for. So yeah, as Carl said, there's many materials available. I do believe all of the books are available as PDFs. So if you're someone who prefers to read on your tablet, they're all available for free there. As Carl said, print copies can be ordered. But if it's one you're interested in, certainly contacting us, and we may have copies available to send out too.
Now, if I can add one more thing, our Claire, Bill, and I have what's called the State Professional Development Grant, where we try to professionally develop people with sustainable opportunities to teach sustainable opportunities. So if we've got an extension staff or other people that are into the teaching role, if you need our help to go someplace or to learn something so you can come home and provide education on that particular topic, please contact us for professional development grants. That's separate from the North Central grants. This is strictly North Dakota. It's part of what we've written to help advance sustainability in North Dakota to our professional staff.
And so does anyone have, and I'm gonna pull up the QR code for the CCAs here. So if anybody wants to get their CCA credit scan, they can do that. But is there any other last questions before we completely wrap up for Claire, Carl, either about SARE or Kernza? Oh, thank you, Jeff. And Jeff just put in the chat box too the evaluation form. So again, please fill out the evaluation at the end of Central Dakota Ag Day. So if this is your last session, please fill it out. But if you're, gonna hop in on some of the other sessions, please wait till you're done going to all the other sessions. And I also want to make sure that we thank our sponsors too. And part of the reason why we're having this talk today is because North Central SARE is one of our sponsors. So we do want to thank them, as well as the North Dakota Corn Council and the Soybean Council. They were also sponsors today. And then the crop improvements from Eddie, Foster, Greg, Sheridan, Stutzman, and Wells County. So we do want to thank them as well too.